We're just getting the recording going. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Governance Committee meeting of September the 4th. Just deal with our echoes here. Is there still another one? Echo. Yeah, it's still there.
Do it again.
It's, what's that called? It's good for karaoke. Reverb. It's my reverb. No, it's gone. Okay, no more singing. Okay, I'd like to start by acknowledging that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasit, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Liaxin, Paucachin, Dididot, and Patchidot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. Mr. Robbins.
Good morning and welcome back. You've already opened the session because you went into closed at the beginning. So your first order of business in the open is the adoption of the minutes of the Governance Committee, July 3rd, 2024.
So I believe there's a note that Director Douglas is listed as being in attendance, but he wasn't actually there. Are there any other errors or omissions? Karen remembers him there. Apparently he was camping.
This morning at our
No, yeah, not today. This is last meeting. So what do I say here? Minutes as amended.
Good.
Moved, seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Mr. Robbins.
You move into public input period.
We welcome anyone in the room. Ms. Bernard, please join us. Push the button. You know the drill.
Good morning, Chair. I'm feeling the weight of representing public input this morning, and I'd like to introduce myself as Kim Bernard from Area B, Shawnigan Lake. I'm here with gratitude to participate in this process, to witness the deliberations and the policy forming that takes place at a governance meeting. And I'd like to share a highlight that I found inspiring this summer that I read from my own area director that was published in the Cowichan Connector. And she described her role as area director as directing community members who often come to her with their issues and concerns, and then directing them to where they can best find the assistance and solutions that they need. And I think I'd like to just highlight that as the epitome and hopefully the bar that is set today, that no one feels alone in their job, that they can empower a whole team of people behind them, that they can identify their community champions and establish dialogue and synergy and just a feeling of warm collaboration in each of their areas and communities. And I think that I'm a product of what my area director did for me in the past, and I look forward in the future to opportunities like that to step forward and to bring people together. And I think it's pretty exciting to do this work, and particularly in today's language, I'm looking for a feeling of impartiality, a feeling of compassion, and just a feeling that the gravitas of the responsibilities that each and every person here at this table represents. And I like to think that anyone in your communities can come to you and feel that sense of trust and belonging and empowerment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone online, Mr. Robbins?
I am not aware of anybody online
Okay.
that.
No one else in the room? So that brings our public input to a close.
In moving into the report section, R1 is the report from Legislative Services with regards to public input and question period policies. And there's a two-part recommendation before the committee.
Great. So we had some great input into these policies, particularly with language around when we can receive public input. And that's any time before a public hearing is scheduled, unless a public hearing is prohibited by Bill 44. And we've been in discussions with Legislative Services to help us with our agendas to make that really clear for the public, as well as for the chair of Electoral Area Services, what items can receive public input and can't. Was anyone prepared to make a motion or any questions, comments? I'll go to Director Morrison and then Director Abbott.
I was going to move the recommendation.
Wonderful. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Director McGonigal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the new student, I wanted to get on the agenda, so thank you. I think it's imperative that the chairs of all committees take this into serious consideration when we're especially talking about Bill 44. Those broached questions that may come up at that time, it would be incumbent for those within the chair's position to cut those off as soon as possible so that we do not come into conflict with the proposed legislation. So just a heads up to all chairs, not just EA. I think the chair of all committees should be especially aware of that when those public hearings are not allowed, which I personally have a little bit of a problem with, but that is what has been brought down by our senior level of government, and we must adhere. Thank you.
Thank you. So looking online around the room, no other discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Ooh, getting business done. Mini recess? No, not a recess. Mini celebration. I'm really excited to be getting work done in this governance committee. Mr. Robbins.
We're going to move to R2, another report from Legislative Services with regards to elected officials' position descriptions. And there's a recommendation that those position descriptions be adopted. Since you last met and had the discussion, we have added, based upon the feedback and the consensus of the governance committee, to add a position description for committee chairperson. And that encompasses all your committees. If you notice the change in the board chairperson, it also refers to the vice chair as well, because when the chair of the board is indisposed, the vice chair takes on all the duties of the chair. And so we've combined those as opposed to separate them. So you don't, and the same with the committee chairs. We liken the chair and the vice chair together, and we haven't separated those. You have seen the one for the municipal director and the electoral area. The only changes really in those were formatting and a bit of feedback and consensus that the governance committee gave us in terms of the preamble with respect to the electoral area directors and who they represent, and that's reflected in the preamble.
Great. Any discussion? Director Deck, go ahead.
I can't pull up the description right now. My screen is full of people. But my notes with regard to the electoral area directors, the quote was to respond to and meet with residents regarding concerns and questions. And I think the way it's put is a challenge to me, because it sounds, I understand when we're reading it, we are addressing the constituents. Oh, I wish I had a copy of the, thank you. This isn't it? Is it? Oh, yes, it is. Okay, so I left my glasses in Drumheller, sorry. As a representative of communities, let me get to the right spot, okay?
Is it the one respond to, meet, and address individual constituents' problems?
Yeah, so you meet, that sounds like meeting with constituents' problems as opposed to the constituents themselves. So what I propose is we meet with and respond to individual constituents and address their problems. Sorry for taking so long.
So that's a noted, yeah, kind of grammatical shift. Do we need a motion for that, Mr. Robbins, or are you furiously writing?
I wrote it down. If you'd like to make a motion, but it is not necessary, but just a little housekeeping, and it looks like there's nod and consensus around the table.
Great, thank you, Director Deck. Any other discussion? Director Nicholson?
This is maybe more of a question than, I'm reflecting on, I think it was last term, there were forest fires in my area, and I was on the emergency, whatever the thing's called, committee that met sort of daily to update, because I do believe that directors are, sort of an intermediary kind of assistance on communications. And I thought that was really important. And what I don't see in here is anything about how, and I get that we're not to make decisions and on emergency management, that's all taken care of. But I do think that there's a role there on the communications front, and I don't see it in here, but I do think it's really important that that's considered, maybe. And I guess I would look to staff for some direction on that. The only mention of emergency is that the chair decides, whatever the word is, decides when there's an emergency. But it doesn't, there's a lot more around emergencies, and I suspect we'll probably have more of those in the future. Thank you.
So you'd like something specific to emergencies, not just like collaborate with the chair to support that role, or?
I would like staff maybe to comment on what would be appropriate.
Do we have anyone, Ms. Miles Wilson?
Yeah, I can make a couple comments. So in relation to emergencies, we would have a communications officer role assigned to a specific situation. And so I would propose that if you would consider any additions, or if you'd want staff to go back and maybe consider what appropriate wording would look like, it would be in relation to amplifying the message that's created through that communications officer role, because that would vet through the proper policy channels and approvals, and the director could kind of amplify the message through their own channels. But that would be like my first thought about how that could work. But I would suggest that we put this back to staff, and we can come up with some appropriate language in consultation with our emergency management staff.
Thanks. Follow up?
I'd appreciate that, and I think that there's sort of the question of what policy role would happen, if you have an emergency in your electoral area. Yeah.
Director Morrison?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is an area that I share some of Director Nicholson's concerns, because it wasn't that long ago that if there was, in my case, I think it was on the job a month, and there was flooding going on in my area. And yes, back then it was the phone lines lit up, not the internet, but there was very limited ability for a director to respond, and we're the people most likely that our residents will go to. So I understand, as emergency management has evolved, that we have the incident command system. We've got all of those professionals in place, staff people, and our chair, who's the spokesperson. But there's just the sense that the electoral area director is relegated to a standby position more than anything. So I don't know that there's anything that needs to be necessarily changed in this policy, but maybe an acknowledgement that if there's an incident in a specific electoral area, that that director and the chair and the emergency management person in charge are having more open communication and two-way communication, so that while there may not be a requirement for the director to amplify message, for them to be aware, because so many people do ultimately end up going to the director for information. So I'd love to hear more from staff as to how they would do that, in a practical sense, so that we're all clear what our role will be in the event of emergencies in our areas. So, thanks.
Thank you. Director Stone.
All good points. I think in practice, and Director Martman could probably speak to this, in practice, when we had those fires, we were both included in the REOC calls that was intended to update us, keep consistent messaging, and then when the messaging came out from the regional district, we were very careful to continue sharing that consistent messaging and keeping everyone that was directly responsible and involved in the loop. So I think in practicality, that's a good point to have it in the policy to express that. But I just, want to assure everyone in practical terms, if there's an emergency, same with the floods, prior to that fire season, the elected officials in those areas were involved in the REOC calls, and also part of the communications feedback loop, so that we could ensure that consistent messaging and that response to community, but makes sense to have it expressed in the policy.
In these job descriptions. Position descriptions. Okay, so I feel like this needs to be referred back.
I think I have a motion that I heard from Director Nicholson that said that a communications piece in the position description for EASC directors around events, emergencies, and role of the directors in an event emergency be added to the position description.
Sorry, before it gets moved, I think that it's not just EASC directors, because when those REOC calls in the flood in North Cowichan Mayor was involved, so it just should be in all
descriptions.
director descriptions, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's been moved by Director Nicholson. Yeah, seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. All right. Oh, yes, Director Stone.
Before we move on, because I think that if this is the only motion to come out of this, the intention, the understanding, I think from my perspective would be next time it comes back with those changes, that we should expect to be able to adopt those position descriptions. So I just would invite anyone who has other thoughts to get those included before we conclude this discussion, because I know what's troubling or frustrating for governance is next time people are like, oh, and then it has to go back again. So if there is anything else anyone has that they've thought of in those position descriptions, maybe bring it forward now so staff could make those changes.
Looking around the room, looking online. Everyone feels okay? Okay. We'll look forward to that next meeting. And I really want to commend you, Mr. Robbins, for all the hard work that you did over our break. It feels really good to come here and in under an hour get through a decent amount of work.
My pleasure.
Director Morrison. Oh, and?
Well, just for clarification, so, and hearing what Director Stone has shared, is there any challenge in us recommending that this move forward to the board for adoption with the recommended changes, as opposed to it coming back here again when we next meet? I don't see any rationale for delay.
Procedurally, that's okay. We've made,
You can make the recommendations to adopt with those changes,
okay.
and that if there is need to, dare I say, tweak at board the
Right.
language that we use, then
We can always refer it back here.
yes. So
But is there a motion on the floor?
So
Not yet.
is that the motion you'd like to make?
Yes, please.
Seconded? Okay, any discussion on that motion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Even more efficient. Mr. Robbins.
Pardon me. Can I put you on the spot in terms of, I don't know if you brought your other topics that you may want to bring forward to your next With that cringe, that's
I
a
need some
signal that
time
I'm not
to
going to put
think
you
about
on the spot.
May I make a suggestion that at the next agenda review,
Yeah.
that we can bring those forward for the next agenda review?
Do you have something that you'd like to
Well,
be
I'm
at the
just
top of the
curious.
list?
Yeah. Are we, okay, I'll just put it on the table. We go through remuneration at a very awkward process. And I'm wondering if we can get into a process that will allow us to put it on the table, the topic, and then come to a conclusion that comes up after the next election. And wondering if that would be something we could talk about.
Director Stone?
So to put it on the governance agenda, I think that's totally appropriate. My intention was in recognition of the roles and responsibilities of these different positions, like the EASC chair not having a remuneration stipend tied to that role, to me is ridiculous. Frankly, in some ways, it can be more onerous than the chair in terms of actual workload. So I would say that, yeah, we'll add that to the agenda. It doesn't need to be a motion today, but that remuneration based on the position descriptions and reflections of reality of the roles that everyone serves, that be reviewed.
Yeah, that's the first one that sprung to my mind too, but I just want to review all the things that we want to get done before I set that in stone. Director Staples?
Yeah, not just to get everyone sort of thinking about this. I think it's more important, having been through this a number of times, both on council and here. It's important for the people that are sitting around this table to make that decision and not push it forward to the next board or council, because they're not going to want to do it either. So let's just do it and get it done. And I think that that's something that as leaders that we need to be responsible for.
Well said. Thank you. Mr. Robbins?
I guess you're going to take it home with a motion to adjourn.
Wait, do we have a question period?
Oh,
No question?
I guess we
Yes?
should look
Yeah.
at what the next steps are. No questions in the gallery or online? Or no, we do have, yes? Okay, my apologies.
Yes, we do. I don't need to read out my blurb for you.
Thank you, Chair. My question is a result of the discussion at today's meeting and highlights a very real situation that happened in Shawnigan Lake on the Shawnigan North Water System on the Friday before the long weekend. And so I would like to ask of the CVRD, is there a way to publish and make abundantly clear the myriad of numbers and contacts for the CVRD for emergency purposes? Because some of us who knew to go to the website and show everyone on the Facebook page, here's the 1-888 number you call for this type of emergency if you have no water, and so on. I think it would be really good, again, in the spirit of empowering our communities, to make that communication redundant, inclusive, exhaustive, and abundantly clear to everyone, so that they feel that they can pick up the phone or use whatever tools at their disposal. Can we make that possible, Chair? Please.
I will speak to all the right people and make that recommendation, yes. Thanks.
And as a follow-up question, and on a more happier, positive note, I'm noticing there's so many people that champion events throughout our communities, but there's no one central place or one consistent mechanism to advertise and share those events across the board, like radio stations do for community calendars. And I'm wondering if the CVRD has any plans or thoughts in that respect to empower communities, or at least to make those tools consistent. I know maybe it's beyond the scope of this committee.
I mean, I know there's plans to update and change the website, and that might be part of that. I'll take it into consideration and see where there's an opportunity.
Much, much appreciated. Hi, Tzapka.
Thanks. Motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? We are adjourned.